Hello, my name is Jerry DeLauro, and I oversee the personal insurance practice here for Hub in Ontario. Our partnership with the OAA goes back many years and originated through the Mumby Insurance Brokerage. Since joining Hub in 2020, Hub and Mumby have worked hard to serve the membership of the OAA. We look forward again to participating at this year's conference and are very excited to sponsor the keynote address. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce the president of the OAA, Susan Spiegel. Over to you, Susan.
Jerry, thank you so much. And good afternoon, everybody. And thank you so much for being with us here today for this exciting keynote presentation. I will be introducing Katharine Hayhoe. In a few moments, I'm just going to go through who we are, because this is a public event, not just an OAA event. I am Susan Spiegel. And although I'm originally from Northern Ontario in Sudbury, I do reside in Toronto and practice as a Toronto-based architect, along with being president of the Ontario Association of Architects, the OAA. Now down to the important business at hand. The OAA, in its commitment to Indigenous wisdom, have been working with a wonderful group called Creative Fire to develop and evolve the OAA land acknowledgement, as we are architects from all throughout Ontario. So I would like to begin today's keynote event by acknowledging the land on which we are collectively situated. So if we could just take a moment to put the day's worries away. For millennia, this place we call Ontario has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples and nations who have been the stewards of the land. We honor the rich culture and natural landscape our building and spaces are part of, and the connection to the land Indigenous peoples have valued since time immemorial. We are grateful for the Indigenous knowledge that guides us and commits to building in harmony with the land and creating sustainable spaces for the generations to come. We and I would like to invite you in a moment of reflection to acknowledge our shared responsibility to address past and present injustices and to provide space for Indigenous knowledge and worldviews to shape the architectural landscape of Turtle Island. Today's talk presents an opportunity to reflect on the roles we each play in our workplaces and our communities in caring for these lands. So for those of you who may not know, as I said before, we're not all architects here today. The OAA regulates the practice of architecture in Ontario, and our primary purpose is to protect the public interest. So as president, I lead our governing council, which guides the association's actions and initiatives. This year, council and staff have worked on defining and developing a 5-year strategic plan to steer the association and strengthen the alignment of our vision and our mandate and our operations to ensure that we're doing the best work in support of the public interest. I'm not going to go through those details now, but you will hear about them at our annual general meeting, which will be at our conference in the spring, and you will be able to attend virtually. The plan has identified 2 very important areas of focus. The 2 key themes that emerge as central to all efforts over the next 5 years is that the OAA remains vigilant in its efforts to make strides in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to eliminate barriers within the profession and the built environment. Secondly, we are deeply committed to ensuring resilient, climate stable architecture is no longer considered just an aspiration or specialty, but the standard expectation for all of our buildings. This ongoing commitment has informed the theme for this year's OAA 2022 conference, Inspiring Climate Action. I tend to be more of a doom and gloom person about this, but it was seen, and Katharine today will be much more along the lines of inspiring climate action, because we have a lot of work to do. Some estimates suggest nearly 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions are attributed to buildings. We in the architecture profession have a profound role to play in designing better. This year's conference will reveal new and exciting developments happening in the built environment, and it's going to push us all to consider what actions we will take as individuals, as communities, and as designers to secure our collective future and those of our children and grandchildren. One of our inspirations for this work is the wonderful Katharine Hayhoe, and it gives me great pleasure to kick off our 2022 conference and registration with her keynote address. One of the many especially wonderful aspects of our keynote speaker is her desire and ability to create dialogue around the climate. So during today's presentation, you will be able to submit questions using the link provided in the Zoom chat. And you'll see, she's a great back and forth dialogue person. She uses the chat in a very active way, so please participate in it. It is now my pleasure to introduce our special guest, Katharine Hayhoe. She is an accomplished atmospheric scientist who studies climate change and why it matters to us here and now. Katharine serves as chief scientist for the Nature Conservancy and is also the Paul W. Horn Distinguished Professor and Political Science Endowed Professor in Public Policy and Public Law at Texas Tech University. And I'm now going to list about 14 special roles and activities that Katharine does. And to tell you the truth, this is greatly edited because I think Katharine has secretly cloned herself 3 times because that is how incredibly active she is. So this is an edit of all the things that Katharine is and does. She is a BSc in physics from the University of Toronto. She's an MS and PhD in atmospheric science from the University of Illinois. She holds an honorary doctorate from Colgate University and Victoria University at the University of Toronto. To go on, Katharine is a remarkable communicator, as you will soon see. She has received the American Geophysical Union Climate Communication Prize, the Stephen Schneider Climate Communication Award, and the United Nations Champion of the Earth Award. These are big and important awards. Katharine has been named to a number of lists, including Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People, Foreign Policy's 100 Leading Thinkers, and Fortune Magazine's World's Greatest Leaders. Her TED Talk, which is called The Most Important Thing You Can Do to Fight Climate Change, is Talk About It, has nearly 4 million views, and her most recent book, Saving Us, The Climate Scientist's Case for Hope and Healing in a Divided World, was published this past September. We are so lucky to have her with us today, and I'd now like to welcome our keynote speaker, Katharine Hayhoe. Thank you, Katharine.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Susan. For a while on Twitter, I had first in line for cloning in my bio, but then I started to get contacted by some really weird people, and so I took it off. It only is me. I am a climate scientist. I also talk a lot about climate change, and I talk a lot about what we can do about it. Because if we know about a problem, but we're not doing anything to fix it, why even know about it? It just makes us stressed and anxious if we don't think there's anything we can do about it. So I love the title of the talk that you gave me today, and let me share my screen with you so you can see it. The title of the talk is Inspiring Climate Action. How do we get people to take action? How do you feel? Give me a word that explains how you feel when somebody says climate change. And what I'm seeing here is, first of all, a completely logical and rational response to the climate challenge. If you understand what's happening, how can you not feel anxious? If you look at what's not happening, how can you not feel overwhelmed, resigned, scared? These words are what I see no matter who I'm speaking to. We feel stressed, despondent, lost, frustrated, responsible, upset, uneasy, confused, frightened, challenged, negative, guilty, angry, worried, concerned, anxious, and overwhelmed. This completely makes sense because we are conducting a truly unprecedented experiment with the only home that we have. Who would not feel this way in light of what we are doing to our planet? And the more we know about what's happening, and I'm a climate scientist, so I know a lot about what's happening, the more we know what's happening, the more concerned we feel. Now, I'm going to come back at the end and ask you another question. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up the questions that you could ask me. Oh, snookered. I haven't seen that one before, and that's a good one. Yes, we do feel snookered. I'm going to open up the questions, and so at any time in my presentation, you can add your questions in. And the fun part is you can upvote other people's questions, because Susan and I will not have time to get to all the questions at the end. We'll get to the ones that are most upvoted. So as we go along, I'm going to open up the questions now, and you can type in a full question here at any time, and you can even upvote the questions you most want answered. But I'm going to respond to what you just said, and I had a good guess of what you were just going to say, because this is the way I feel too. When you look at what we're doing to our planet, when you look at how much carbon we're putting into the atmosphere, when you look at how quickly things are changing faster than any time in the history of humans on this planet, how can you not feel anxious, overwhelmed, and depressed? We've known for over 150 years exactly what's happened. Yes, that's how long we've known that digging up coal back then and gas and oil today and burning them produce heat-trapping gases that are building up in the atmosphere, wrapping an extra blanket around our planet. That is why our planet is running a fever. Why does this matter to us, though? It matters for something that is very important to architects. It matters because it upsets the assumption of stationarity and stability on which every aspect of our society is built. So we know that it's hot and cold and wet and dry, but we also know that over long periods of time, the long-term average and the range of variability can be predicted based on the past. We have used this information to plan for the future as if we're looking in the rear-view mirror. For thousands of years, we have allocated our water resources, we have built our homes and our buildings and our roads, we have grown our crops based on the information from the past, based on when it used to rain, or how hot it gets, or how much water we have. Planning for the future based on the past is like driving down the road looking in the rearview mirror. If you're driving down Highway 155 from Peterborough to Toronto, and there's some parts of it that are really straight, then if you're driving along looking in the rearview mirror, and I'm not recommending you do so, I'm just saying hypothetically, if one did that, one could stay on the road in their lane. Why? Because the road is pretty straight. And so where you were in the past is a good guide of where you'll be in the future. But on Highway 55, which is in the same area, if you hit a curve like this and you're looking in the rearview mirror, what's going to happen? You're going to run off the road. So whether or not looking backwards works depends on whether the road is straight or not. And today, the road is not straight. Today, the road is curving more than it ever has in the history of human civilization on this planet. Why does it matter? Because it affects, again, our building codes, our flood zones, our electricity demand, our energy demand. All of those, every aspect of the planning that we put into the buildings we design and maintain is based on the assumption of a stable climate. How did we get our building codes? Based on past climate. But today, climate is changing, and it isn't only the averages that are changing. One of the biggest ways climate is changing is by loading the weather dice against us. What do I mean by that? I mean that wherever we live, it's like we have a pair of dice that have 2 6s on them. And so we could roll a double 6, which is a heat wave or Hurricane Hazel back in the 1950s, or a flood or a drought or a storm or a wildfire. That's normal. That's natural. Where does climate change come in? Decade by decade, as the planet is warming, it is sneaking in and taking one of these numbers and then another one and turning them into 6s, and then even turning some numbers into 7s. And all of a sudden, we're rolling disaster after disaster, saying, how could this be happening? The answer is climate change, loading the weather dice against us, making our heat waves more dangerous, our droughts more intense, our wildfires burning greater area, our hurricanes stronger with more rain. We're seeing these impacts around the whole world. We see them in Japan, in India, in Madagascar, in Argentina. We see them in British Columbia. We see them in Ontario. We see them in Nova Scotia. We see them definitely up in the Arctic. Wherever we are, we're seeing how climate change is loading the weather dice against us. And part of what it's doing is it's not only making these events much more extreme. The British Columbia heat wave from the other summer was 150 times more likely because of climate change, but we're also getting whiplash because of how quickly things change. From extreme heat and wildfires, we went right to record-breaking floods within 6 months. How? Because we've always had atmospheric rivers of moisture that when they hit the mountains on the west coast and rise, they dump all that moisture on the west coast. But the warmer it gets, the more water vapor there is for those atmospheric rivers to sweep up and dump on us. All across Canada, we're seeing the impacts of warmer winters allowing beetles to overwinter, eating millions of acres of trees, of wildfires burning greater area, of floods increasing in severity and frequency, of invasive species moving into the area that we've never seen before. We know that we're always in harm's way, but we also know that harm's way is increasing. In 2018, there was $1.9 billion worth of insured damages due to extreme climate and weather events in Canada. Oops. In 2021, there was $2.1 billion. When we look back, during the 1990s and the 2000s, our extreme weather-related losses averaged about $500 million Canadian a year. Even leaving out the damages from the Fort McMurray wildfires, which were the most costly insured disaster in Canada to date, the 2010s were still 3 times higher, and of course now we're over $2 billion. In the United States, back in the 1980s, when they first started tracking billion-dollar weather and climate disasters, they had about one of them every 4 months in the United States. Today, there's one of them every 3 weeks. That is how climate change is loading the weather dice against us. Why does it matter? It matters because it affects us. These changes literally affect the quality and the quantity of the water available to us. These changes affect the air that we breathe. These changes affect the food that we eat. These changes affect the buildings and the roads, the water and the hydro systems, even the internet systems that we use. All of our infrastructure is designed for a planet that no longer exists. And because of that, we are starting to see it break down. When we look at why climate change matters, it matters because it affects things that all of us care about. Climate change affects our water, our food, our security, our economy, our health. And speaking to what's happening today, fossil fuel use, which is the primary reason why climate is changing, fossil fuel use is also the primary cause of 10 million premature deaths from air pollution around the world every year. But fossil fuel use is also a contributing factor in the Ukraine-Russian war today. Svetlana Krakowska is a climate scientist, and she's Ukrainian. And I myself have a Ukrainian heritage. My great-grandparents fled Western Ukraine last time they were invaded by Russia. Some of them made it to Toronto. Some of them didn't make it. And looking at those days so long ago, we see history repeating itself today. But today we know what part of what's contributing to this. And this is what Svetlana says. She's a climate scientist. She contributes to the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And she says, human-induced climate change and the war on Ukraine have the same roots, our dependence on fossil fuels. We will not surrender in Ukraine, and we hope the world will not surrender in building a climate-resilient future. Climate change is not a standalone issue. We care about it because it affects our infrastructure, our economy, our energy, our water, our natural resources, our health, our food, our biodiversity. It affects and exacerbates political conflict, and it is profoundly an issue of justice and equity. Those who are most affected by it, women and children in low-income countries, marginalized populations right here in Canada as well as in the United States, low-income versus high-income countries, those most affected by it are those who have done the least to contribute to the problem. It isn't about saving the planet. The planet will be orbiting the sun long after we are gone. It is quite literally about saving us, and by us, I mean us humans and most of the other living things that share this planet with us. Climate change matters because it affects us. We often think that to care about climate change, you have to be a certain type of person. A David Suzuki person, a Catherine McKenna person, an Elizabeth May person, maybe a Greta Thunberg person, or maybe just a polar bear. And we think, well, these people worry about climate change and these people are helping to fix it. But if I'm not one of these, then it's not my issue. Wrong. If you're a human living on planet Earth, you already have every reason you need to care, because climate change is already affecting every aspect of your life. Whoever we are, I've concluded after thousands of conversations I've had, whoever we are, we're already the perfect person to care about and act on climate change. And here's the corollary to that. Here's the conclusion that we can come to if we extend this. So if someone else doesn't care about this issue, we don't have to make them care about it for the same reason we do. We just have to figure out who, what, or where they already love, how climate change affects them, and how climate action benefits them. So I might care because I love to ski, and you need snow to ski. Somebody else might care because they really enjoy birding, or they have a child, or they might be a person of faith, or they live in Toronto, or they live in Calgary, or they live up in the Yukon. We all have different reasons to care, and we don't have to care for the same reason. We just have to figure out what reasons people already have and connect the dots to show them that who they already are is the perfect person to care. That is how we inspire climate action. By showing people that climate impacts exactly what they already care about, and climate action benefits what already matters to them as well. So gone is the need to convince everyone to care for the same reason we do. Good luck with that, trying to convince everybody that you should care because of the reasons I care. Gone is the drive to recruit people to our clan. It doesn't matter. All you have to be is a human to care about this. And this is important, and this touches on a few of the words that you offered at the beginning. Gone is the need to coerce or guilt or shame others into acting as if they don't have any reason to act other than what people think of them. Believe me, if we're guilting, coercing, or shaming people into acting, they're only going to be doing it as long as you're looking. And then as soon as you go away, you're not inspiring climate action, you're inspiring climate inaction. So how do we begin? We begin with something we have in common rather than something that divides us. Rather than beginning with something we disagree on, begin with something we agree on. Explain, how does this affect both of us? And people might say, well, what am I supposed to begin with? In my book, I tell a few stories about this. How, for example, I was approached by a man who worked at NASA. And he's a scientist. And he said, I work on climate change, but how do I talk about this with my friends? I don't know where to start. So I said, well, what do you enjoy doing with your friends? And he said, we cook together. I said, well, there you go. Start talking about how climate change is affecting our food, how it's affecting specialty crops like coffee or chocolate, how it's affecting beer and wine quality, how it's affecting the nutritional content of food in some of the poorest countries in the world. As you're preparing your food with your friends, talk about food. A young woman came up to me and said, well, how do I talk about it with my grandmother? And I said, well, what do you do with your grandma? And she said, we knit together. Well, I knit too. So I said, well, have you seen the warming stripes? It's a pattern by Ed Hawkins where every stripe is a year. And if it's cooler than normal, it's blue. If it's warmer than normal, it's red. If it's average, it's white. I said, go to showyourstripes.info. That's the website. Find the stripes for the place where your grandma grew up. You can turn it into a knitting pattern. There's even companies like Tempestry that have the whole kit that you can buy with all the right colors of yarn, and knit a temperature scarf with your grandma and ask her to tell you stories of the record cold or warm years that she lived through as a child. And then as you get towards the end and the scarf turns dark red, ask her how she's seen things changing in the place where she lives. Whoever we are, we already have ways that we can connect with people. We might both be parents. We might live in the same place. We might both be really into canoeing or kayaking or sailing. We might both be members of the Rotary Club. We might both be small business owners. We might both be gardeners. Begin with something we agree and share, connect the dots to why it matters, and always bring in positive, constructive solutions that people can get on board with. Because what's the point of telling people there's a problem if we don't talk about what solutions look like? And we'll get there. So often people say, how do we get people to act? What's the first step? Why aren't we treating this like the emergency that it is? Well, the first critical step to people acting together is so simple we often don't think about it. It's using our voice. How can people act together if we don't use our voices? And when we look around and we see what people think in Canada, and this is a map of public opinion in Canada, and we see, okay, well, there's a lot of people who do agree that the Earth is getting warmer because of human activities, but there's also a lot of people who don't, the blue areas. And then there's people who don't even understand that human activities are the main reason. In fact, not even the main reason, the only reason. According to natural factors, we should be getting cooler right now, not warmer. Human activities are the only reason we're warming. We think if they just knew the facts, surely they'd change their minds, right? And this is a little cartoon from my YouTube series called Global Weirding. I have a number of short videos, about 30 of them, that all answer frequently asked questions, and this is one of the frequently asked questions. So if they just knew the facts, they'd change their minds, right? So climate changes, and we get worried. The majority of us are worried. And we think, I'm just going to tell people all the really scary things that are happening. And surely that will get them activated. Here's the problem. If somebody tells us information, it doesn't matter how scary or worrisome or anxiety-inducing it is. If we don't know what to do about it, our human brain, our defense mechanism, just causes us to switch off. If we don't know what to do, then more scary information just causes people to pull the blanket up over their head and go back to bed, and inaction results. Tali Sherrod is a neuroscientist, and she wrote a book called The Influential Mind. It doesn't mention climate change, but it's all about climate change because it's all about how we as humans react to information. And in it, she says something very profound. She says, fear and anxiety cause us to withdraw, to freeze, to give up rather than take action. So we dump more information on people and they withdraw and freeze and give up even more, and climate changes more. How do we break the vicious cycle? We often think that we need to focus our efforts on the people who say it isn't real. And in the United States, it's about 25% of people who say it isn't real. In Canada, I don't know the exact numbers, but 15 to 20%. But that's not the biggest problem we have. The much bigger problem we have is the gap between people who say it's real and people who say it matters. And the even bigger gap we have is between people who say it's real and people who say they're activated. This is the biggest problem we have. So why are we having these conversations? It's not to convince Uncle Joe. It's to talk to other people just like us who are worried, but they don't know what to do and they don't understand why it matters. That's the biggest reason why our conversations matter. How do we feel? Well, in Canada, 75% of us, and in the US, 70% of Americans are worried. But half of us feel hopeless and we don't know where to start. And like I said, only 8% are activated. Why are we not activated? It's not because we lack the facts. It's because we don't understand why it matters so urgently, and we don't know what we can do to fix it. So how do we talk about these? I want to unpack these two a little bit more. How do we talk about why it matters and what we can do to fix it? We don't understand why it matters because we are prone to something called psychological distance. We see risks as being far away from us in time or space, abstract rather than concrete, or irrelevant to our primary concerns. I showed you some maps earlier on public opinion in Canada, and now I'm going to show you some on public opinion in the US, just because I don't have these same questions for Canada. The survey for Canada didn't have as many questions in it as the one did for the US. But honestly, people aren't that different south of the border. A bit different, but not that different, because we're all humans and we all suffer from psychological distance. So when you ask people in the US, is global warming real? Most people say yes. Most of the country is orange. And when you say, will it affect plants and animals, non-human species? Yes. How about future generations, people in the future? Yes. How about people in developing countries who live far away? Yeah, probably. Do you think climate change will affect you? All of a sudden it goes blue. Psychological distance. So what do we need to talk about? We need to talk about psychological proximity. It is right now. It is right here. It is concrete, the crazy heat wave and the wildfire smoke that we were breathing into our own lungs last summer in Southern Ontario. And it is relevant to me. It affects our building codes, the integrity of our structures, the hydro bills that we pay, the insurance rates that were covered. We have to understand why it matters, and we also have to understand what we can do to fix it. Both sides of the coin. People are willing to act if they feel efficacy. In other words, if they believe that what they do will make a difference. But most of us don't. How do we build efficacy? How do we tackle psychological distance? Start with something that most of us are not doing. And again, I'm sorry, these are US maps right here, but the data I've seen for Canada, I don't have a map, I just have pinpoints for Canada. It's pretty similar. I left off here with the number of people who didn't think global warming affected them personally, but there's another map that's even darker blue. Do you ever talk about it? Do you ever talk about it? No. And if we don't talk about it, why would you care? And if you don't care, why would you ever do anything about it? Talking is not sufficient, but talking is an essential first step, using our voice to advocate for action based on the risks we face here and now today. What can we talk about? We can talk about how climate change is affecting us, and we can talk about what we can do to fix it. We can talk about how it's affecting our water, our food, the safety of our homes, our economy, our health. A while ago, I was asked, not by anyone from Churchill, Manitoba, I would add. I think it was someone from Iowa that asked me this question. They said, how do you talk about polar bears where I live? I said, unless you're from Churchill, Manitoba, you don't. Instead, you talk about Lyme disease being spread by ticks, which have moved across the border in the last 20 years. I grew up running through the woods every summer. We had a cottage up in Muskoka, and I was in the woods every day from sunup to sundown. Never had a single tick. Never had my mother check me for ticks. Not anything we ever had to worry about. My husband grew up in Virginia, and he grew up running through the woods every summer too, and every night his mother had to check him for ticks because they had them there. Well, guess what? Because it's getting warmer, we've got all kinds of unwelcome visitors from south of the border. We've got kudzu over the border into southern Ontario. We've got Lyme disease carried by ticks over the border. We've got all kinds of invasive species moving right into Ontario where we live. What else can we talk about? Well, if we are from out west, or we have friends or family out west, or if we were just in Ontario and saw the bronze skies and breathed in the wildfire smoke this summer, we can talk about wildfires and how they're affecting our health and our safety. We can talk about the floods in Ottawa and the Algonquin area, as well as in Vancouver. We can talk about the heat waves that we are experiencing and how they affect our health and our air pollution in our biggest cities. Talk about why it matters here and now in ways that are concrete and relevant to our lives. And we also need to talk about what we can do to fix it. We know what climate solutions look like. We have to stop putting so much carbon into the atmosphere. We have to take carbon out of the atmosphere, and we have to build resilience to the impacts we can no longer avoid. How do we stop putting carbon into the atmosphere? Yes, clean energy is one piece of it, but so is efficiency. And that's where you come in. Building efficiency is a huge way to save money and to stop so much carbon going into the atmosphere and create jobs and clean up our air. What about buildings? There's so many things that can be done with buildings. It's not just the archetypal solar panels on the roof or even the solar glass tiles. It's insulation, it's efficiency, it's net zero. It's retrofitting houses, triple glazed windows, insulation in the attic, programmable thermostats. So much that we can do with our homes to help stop all that carbon from going into the atmosphere. But there's also solutions that take carbon out of the atmosphere. Solutions that put it back into the soil to help us grow better crops. And in Canada, the Nature United, which is what the Nature Conservancy is called in Canada. The Nature Conservancy works in 76 countries around the world. It's called the Nature Conservancy in 75 countries, and it's called Nature United in Canada. Nature United has looked at nature-based solutions, and it's shown that they could take a huge amount of carbon out of the atmosphere and put it back into the soil, not just through planting trees, although of course that helps, not just through restoring ecosystems, although of course that helps, but also through smart agriculture that benefits our farmers and our rural communities. Then there's solutions that build resilience and clean up our air and improve people's health and reduce urban flood risk and address socioeconomic inequalities. Oh, and they take up carbon too. Like greening low-income neighborhoods, reducing flood risk, improving air filtering. And there, the built environment is a huge part of that. Whether it's the floating homes that they're building in the Netherlands so that if sea level goes up a meter, big deal, you just go to the hardware store and get another meter of anchor chain. In Florida, they're doing something a lot more expensive. They're actually raising the level of the roads. In the city of Houston, they're restoring their bayous so that there's a place for water to go. In Chicago, they're putting green roofs on the buildings. In Toronto, they're using, the deep water from Lake Ontario to help cool buildings. There's so much that can be done in the area of the built environment to cut our carbon emissions and to build a more resilient future for all of us. How do we encourage climate action? How do we inspire people to act? By helping them see that the giant boulder of climate action is not sitting at the bottom of an impossibly steep cliff with only a few hands on it trying to push it up and it's never going to budge. When we start looking around at all the cities, all the municipalities, all the provinces, all the companies and corporations and nonprofits and churches and all of the different organizations that are acting, we realize that that giant boulder is already at the top of the hill. It is already rolling down the hill in the right direction. It already has millions of hands on it. And if we add ours, and if we use our voice to encourage others to add theirs, it will go faster. We can make a difference. And that is what inspires us to act. When we act, that's where we find hope. Real hope, not bury your head in the sand and hope everything's going to be okay hope. That's not a real hope. That's just a false hope. A real hope that recognizes that it's bad and it's going to get worse. Success is not inevitable, but there is a path to a better future, and here's how we get there. People often argue, do we need system-wide or individual change? And my answer to that argument is yes. Because how does the system change other than when people engage their voices and advocate for change at every level where they work, where they live, where they play, where they join? Every one of us has a role to play, and it begins with using our voice. Our voice is like the first domino. When we talk to people about why it matters, when we talk to people about what they and we together can do to make a difference, it knocks over that first domino in the long chain that leads us to that better future. Is talking really that important, though? Well, George Marshall is a really great thinker on climate change. And he wrote a book called Don't Even Think About It, Why Our Brains Are Wired to Ignore Climate Change. And in it, he says a few things I wanted to share with you and a few things that he shared with me after he wrote the book. He says, talk is the fertile field in which cultural change begins. In its absence, it's impossible for a group of people to solve a problem. Conversations underpin all of our climate action, where people invest their money, what party they vote for, what energy source they use at home. All of these actions begin with what? Conversations. Having conversations about climate change in our daily lives plays a huge role in creating social change. We take our cues about what's important from what we hear from our family, our friends, our colleagues, and our neighbors. The goal of the conversation is not to tell people about climate change. Remember, it's not to dump more fear-based facts on them because that just shuts us off. It's to expand the number of people in the conversation. So when climate changes and we get worried, here's how you break the cycle. You know how to do this now, right? Instead of loading up on fear-based facts, what do you share? You talk about how it's affecting us here and now in ways that are relevant to us today. And you talk about what positive solutions look like. People feel empowered. They understand the risk, but they also understand the reward of action. Action results. And you know what? This is how our brains are wired to work. The human brain is built to associate forward action with a reward, not avoiding harm. So again, this is the neuroscience. Reframe your message so the information you provide induces hope, not dread. As Greta Thunberg says, the one thing we need more than hope is action. Why? Because once we start to act, hope is everywhere. So the only question I think that's confronting us today is, what are we waiting for? And often what we're waiting for is just, what can we do individually? And that's why I wrote my book, Saving Us. The most important thing that we can do to start this is to use our voice to talk about what? About what we're doing personally, about what our city is doing, about what a company we heard about is doing, about what the province is doing, about what we should be doing, what we should be doing more of. Talk about what action looks like. That is how every single one of us truly can save ourselves. So one last question for you before we go to your questions. I want you to give me a word again. I want you to give me a word of how you feel. Go back to pollev.com/Katharine, my name, and give me a word. When I say climate change now, how do you feel? Knowing that you can tell people why it matters, knowing that you can tell people what real solutions look like, knowing that you can tell people that there is a path to a better future if we add our hand to that giant boulder and we get it going faster. Of course, we're still worried. How could we not be? But I love that somebody said better. That's good. Engaged, empowered, inspired, activated. We are only doomed if we decide we are. If we decide we're doomed, if we decide there's nothing we can do, we are doomed. But if we recognize that we can make a difference, if we recognize that, as the science literally says, every action matters, every choice matters, every year matters, every bit of warming matters, that message is an empowering message. That message is a truly hopeful message that begins by saying it's bad and it will get worse, but there is a better future out there. And what determines that future? That future is, quite literally, as I just showed in that last slide, that future is in our hands. Over to you, Susan.
Okay, just remember to take myself off mute. I wanted to just thank you for that kind of kick in the pants, inspiration to start talking. And I know a lot of people think, well, what should we actually do? Architects are very practically oriented, and we want to know what to do. And I just want to tell a really short story because it's not dissimilar to what you have generated. As part of what we do, we visited all the architectural societies all across Ontario in the fall. And at our first discussion about what do we want to do, what's the most important thing, and also what are we doing about the climate with architects, there was one small practitioner who said, I'm small, which most practices are in Ontario. I don't have time. I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do. And the reason I'm telling this story is because it's very close to the first and second question that's here. And in a way, although we knew we wanted to make our conference about the climate, we actually kind of swiveled 180 degrees as the OAA decided all our webinars, all conference, everything is about climate and nothing else, so that we can start enabling people, putting tools in their hands to start studying again, about what to do, because we're the ones who need to do something. And also we made it mandatory. People have to take mandatory courses, not like just nice to have, as I said before. And I think that this is, like, there are a lot of questions. I was watching the chat go by. Well, what are we going to do? What about cities? What about agri-food, permaculture? All of these things are also a resource on our website. Anything, we are not developing content. We are curating content that's amazing all over the world about what to do. So that is our question. That's my answer to what we're doing, which is come to the conference, take your webinars, start studying, watch every podcast you can, and get into the conversation by watching things that are relevant to you and your practice, not maybe just you and your family as well. But anyway, so that was one of the very big questions. That was the first one. So shall I keep going?
Well, I love your answer to that. Every little bit counts. So often we feel like we have to save the world all on our own. We don't. We just have to do what we can do. And it begins with thinking about not just our personal carbon footprint, but rather our climate shadow. The ripple effect by which we can affect our clients, our neighbors, people we know, people in our city, people where we work, people where we study. And how do we engage that ripple effect? By using our voice just to talk about it. Talk about why it matters. And somebody said in the chat, they said, how do I start the conversation? I said, the best place to start is with something that the other person or people care about. And if you don't know what they care about, then ask them questions and get to know them first, rather than remember what I said at the beginning. Don't force them to care for the same reason you do. Figure out what reasons they already have.
So maybe I will go to the questions now and start peppering you with questions. Have you looked at how zoning affects how green our cities are? For example, most zoning only allows for single family detached homes, so no density can occur, which means cars. Meanwhile, urban planning of cities sprawls out into the suburbs.
That is a huge issue because we know that transportation is a big source of our heat trapping gas emissions. There's no one single source. Buildings are a big chunk, transportation is a big chunk, land use and agriculture is a big chunk, and then industry is a big chunk. So there's these big chunks, and transportation is an issue because if people live out in the suburbs and they're driving back and forth because they don't have great transportation, then that's a huge contributor. It's not just a huge contributor to carbon emissions, it's a huge contributor to air pollution, and it's a huge contributor to their wallet as well. So public transportation and zoning to allow the high density that permits public transportation, those are really important parts of the solution. And that just goes to show, people often say, well, I'm not a climate scientist. What am I supposed to do? To be totally honest, an urban planner for a big city will probably have a bigger influence than a climate scientist in terms of actual solutions. An architect who's designing buildings will probably have a bigger actual tangible impact than a climate scientist in terms of being able to either retrofit or design buildings that are low carbon or net zero, adequately insulated, passive, powered by clean energy, flood resistant, heat resistant as well. There's so much that we can do and so much that matters. Climate change is not a separate bucket or a separate issue. Climate change is the whole in every other bucket that we're thinking about. So it isn't something extra to bring into the conversation. It's something that's already there, whether we know it or not. Whether we're talking about building design, whether we're talking about urban zoning, whether we're talking about flood zones, whether we're talking about public transport or public planning. Climate change is the great threat multiplier. And a few people were saying in the chat, well, climate has changed before, so what's the big deal? It has changed before. The reason you know is because we climate scientists study that. And because we know how it's changed before, that's why we're so worried about today. Because today it is changing 50 times faster than the biggest change that humans have ever lived through. 50 times faster. We're headed way out of our comfort zone within a single generation. And that is why we need solutions at every single scale.
So good answer. I want to move on. I'm kind of reading off two screens right now, but architects are stewards of the built environment. We have a responsibility to build sustainably despite the wishes of the client. A doctor doesn't agree to give lesser care if the patient is misguided towards their own health. They educate, if necessary, refuse if it's against their oath. And this was one of the biggest complaints we had in Ontario, which is like, yes, we know what to do, but our clients don't want to pay for it. And we don't have a building code that says you must. And so, I mean, that is a big job of the OAA and all the societies of architects. And I saw petitions going around and all kinds of suggestions about how to mobilize, which we all need to do. I'm sort of asking and answering the question at the same time.
You are. No, that's good.
So
well, how do building codes change? They change when enough people use their voice to advocate for that change. And when we're pushing that rock, we might feel like it's not budging, but eventually it does, because we know that building codes do change. It just takes longer than we want them to. And how do you get it moving faster? You get more hands pushing that boulder in the right direction. But at the same time, it isn't only about changing the building codes, it's also about showing people the benefits. So for example, if you have a client who's balking at, paying for the design that you've made, you can be like, let me take you and let's go visit somewhere else where we did similar things, or somebody else did similar things last year or the year before. Let's have a conversation with those people. Let's ask them what they see as the benefits, both short-term and long-term, of the things that they paid for in their design. Let's go look at what that looks like, and let's talk about the benefits, not just the benefits on heat trapping gas emissions, but the other benefits of saving you money and better quality build and more resilience to extremes. Let's go and see other people, and let's look at, again, not just the risks, but let's look at the rewards of action. There's a lot of different ways we can tackle this, and it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to get everybody on the same page. But the more we use our voices, the more people we get on board, the more hands we get helping to roll that boulder down the hill, the faster it goes.
This is a really good question, and I'm going to, not answer it as I ask it. The real issue is the entrenched systems already in place that thwart individual efforts or even group efforts to affect change. I mean, the people who created climate change are the people who have the biggest interest in, paying for carbon offsets so they can continue to sin. I mean, I know you're suggesting incremental change by each and every one of us as individuals, but do you have a picture of how we could really tackle as a profession the people who benefit the most from creating the climate problem that we have at the present?
Absolutely. So first of all, I'm seeing a few comments in the chat. All too often, we're very quick to point our fingers at other countries. We here in Canada are just a small country, so why does our emissions matter? Let's look at some other countries. Well, our cumulative emissions, which are what are changing climate, all of the emissions we've produced over our history, they put us in the top 10. We, Canada, are in the top 10 of the biggest emitters. So we need to take the beam out of our own eye, so to speak, before we point to the splinter in somebody else's. We all have a lot of work to do, and it begins at home. And believe me, we're not the only ones. The other misconception I run into is, well, we're doing so much, but nobody's doing anything else. That's not true either. I live in Texas now, where almost a quarter of the state's electricity comes from clean energy. The city of Houston, the home of the oil and gas industry in Canada, has a climate plan and Paris targets. China has more wind and solar energy than any other country in the world. India has more green jobs than any other country in the world. None of these countries are perfect. None of these countries are doing everything they could or should do, but neither are we, right? So all of us have something to do. And we often think then too, okay, so I've focused on my carbon footprint. I have reduced my personal emissions. I've looked at how I travel, what I eat, where I live. I've looked at all the aspects of my personal life, and I've reduced everything I can. Then I hear about an airline flying 3,000 empty flights just to keep their gate assignments. Or I was speaking to a woman who said, she is so zero waste that she could put all the plastic she produces over the course of a year into a single Ziploc baggie. And then she said that she had a heart attack and she ended up in the hospital. And the amount of plastic waste they generated during one day of her being in the hospital exceeded anything she generated over the past 10 years of her life. And she thought, why am I even doing this? What's the point? So we focus on our individual actions, and then we get discouraged when we don't see that the big actors are changing. And then we think there's nothing we can do. And then that's where we give up. We despair. We become distressed and discouraged. And that's because we don't understand that the biggest force that we have is our voice. We don't understand that our climate shadow is bigger than our carbon footprint. We don't understand that the world has changed before. How was slavery abolished in the UK and the British Empire, which Canada was part of at the time? How did women get the vote? How were civil rights enacted in the United States? How was apartheid ended in South Africa? It wasn't because the big, powerful, wealthy people whose income depended on maintaining these unjust systems, it wasn't because they woke up one day and said the world had to change. They didn't. They fought it tooth and nail, just as those whose income depends on fossil fuels and on lack of climate action are fighting climate action tooth and nail today. It was the exact same thing, and some of the exact same arguments were used. How did the world change? It changed when ordinary average people who were not famous, most of whose names we don't even know today, a few of whom we do know today, the William Wilberforces, the Pankhurst sisters, the Nelson Mandelas, the Martin Luther King Jr.'s of the world, it was when people who had the courage of their convictions used their voice to advocate for that better future, to call for action. And they united other people with them and more people until finally the small numbers at the top could no longer resist. They had to change. That's how we changed the world before, and that is how we must and we can change the world again.
On that note, I know we are coming to the end, and there is no final sentence other than that, and your call to action individually, and if that means for the OAA individually, for all of us to act as a body, action, talk and action is what I'm taking away from this. And I hope that we are, with our webinars and our conference, following your lead and getting information into the hands of people who need to act. And that's all of us. Thank you so much for this wonderful and inspiring talk. And I think a lot of people might have opinions and criticisms, and other people are just feeling inspired by your words that you took at the beginning and the end. I think people are feeling like it's time to start. Just start anywhere.
Yes.
Somewhere.
I would just leave you with this challenge. Here's what I would say. There is no one silver bullet that will fix the whole thing. I see people already starting to argue over, should we be doing this or this or this? The answer is we need to do everything. So what should you do? Do something, anything, and then talk about it.
Perfect ending to a wonderful talk. Thank you so much, Katharine. And I want people not to go away because I need to talk to you about the conference. But Katharine, thank you. And I know you have to run. So this was wonderful, wonderful kickoff. Okay, Katharine has left the building. And I want to please remember that registration is now open for the 2022 OAA Conference. So this year, we struggled a lot with this, and we went out on a limb thinking things are going to open up, and happy dates, the start of No Mask Day. This year's conference is a hybrid event with in-person and virtual packages available. We have reduced student associate pricing. We want students and intern architects, technologists, OAAS and OAAS students, free access for students who sign up for the virtual package. Please. You are the future of our profession. Included in this pricing are not only 3 days of activities and events, but a fantastic structured content learning opportunities. And we're coming to the end of that cycle, as we're warned on a scary basis almost every day on the internet. The conference will feature a number of really special pre-conference webinars, including the upcoming one called Nature-Based Solutions and the Resilient City this Thursday, as well as plenary discussions about regenerative architecture and design, awards, and newly licensed member ceremonies, offsite experiences at the OAA headquarters. And for those of you who aren't architects, the OAA headquarters has been refreshed, and we met the 2030 challenge in 2020. And we would love for you to come and have a tour of our building and see what we did. Our electrical bill for the year is $49 or $59, excuse me. That's amazing. We have a lot of social events to invite you to reconnect with familiar faces. Please visit oaa.on.ca/conference. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you all there. And for those of you who are virtual, there are a lot of virtual streamed events, and they'll be posted to our site afterwards. So there's no reason to miss anything. So thank you for all being here today.